Hello, this is me, Erika Stahl von Holstein.
And this is Luca De Biase.
Welcome to Reimagine Talks, the podcast that challenges the way we think. Today we're here to challenge and question the concept of Europe. And we're very happy to have with us Caroline de Gruyter to explore this very important topic with us today.
Caroline de Gruyter is an award-winning journalist and lecturer based in Brussels. She is a European affairs correspondent and columnist for the leading Dutch newspaper Handelsblad and a regular contributor to foreign policy, EUobserver and De Standaard. She spent more than 20 years covering Europe from different corners of the continent. She has written 5 books dealing with globalization, Europe, political quicksand of sovereignty. She wrote this latest book, which is the best-selling comparison between the EU and the Habsburg Empire. It explores our misconceptions about Europe and how changing the way we think about this unique political project could be an important step enabling us to move forward effectively.
Well, Caroline, first of all, thank you so much for joining us here today on Reimagine Talks. We are less than 2 months away now from the big European elections that will take place in the beginning of June. And it's been 5 turbulent years for Europe. Do you think we have a common conception of Europe? And why do you think it's important to reimagine Europe at this point in time?
First of all, thank you for having me in your podcast. I'm very honored. Yes, I think there is a common conception of Europe. And actually, I think we are moaning a lot and complaining every day about God knows what. And outside your office, apparently there are farmers protesting as well. And tomorrow there will be somebody else. But I think our conception of Europe becomes more and more clear. When I felt European for the first time, and I still remember it, I was living in the Middle East. I was living actually in the Gaza Strip. This was in the 1990s. In those days, you had to leave Europe to feel European in a way. Nowadays, you can feel European in Europe. You just turn on the television and you see what is happening in the Middle East. You see what is happening in Ukraine, in Russia. And, this helps us in a way. I'm sorry to say, but it helps us to redefine who we are. I think for a long time, especially after the fall of the wall, the concept of Europe was extremely vague. First of all, people seemed to think that it was only about the shape of the bananas, technocratic stuff. It's probably important, but, it's far away from me. Now we are discussing big themes that people care about. Defense, health since the pandemic as well. We used to do animal health in Europe, but now it's just, we're finally, dealing with human health as well since the pandemic. We have, I think this is important. We have, much clearer external borders. Since the fall of the wall, Europe was all about freedom and diversity and exploring all of that. So we used to, Europe was like a space, a boundless space to roam around in. And now Europe is becoming more of a place, which is a different concept. A place is where you go when you want security, when you want warmth, like a nest. Because we have neighbors who are assertive more and more and sometimes outright aggressive. So people want protection. And, I think this helps us. They always say you only know who you are when you know who you are not. Well, I think in this case, Mr. Putin makes it very clear, for instance, who we are not. And that helps us to for us to feel in a certain way more European. In Europe, identities are always layered. You have local identities, national ones. I think Europeans are rather good at dealing with that. And the European identity is just one of several. But I think it is somewhat more strongly felt than before. So actually, you might even argue there's not much to imagine anymore. It's there.
Well, when you researched for your new book about the comparison between Europe and the Habsburg Empire, you said that you changed your view about Europe. These two entities with multicultural content, and various nations, between which also mine, which is Veneto, the place where is Verona and Venice and everything. So in which sense you changed your view about Europe? Was something about what we are or what we are not?
Something about what we are, but I never saw it. So, debates in Europe about Europe are always framed, and we fall into that trap too, often, framed by sort of a strange antagonism between the federalists on the one hand, who want more Europe. For them, there's never enough Europe. They're probably right, but they will never get it. They will never get it. So they're all the time disappointed. On the other hand, you have the nationalists. The nationalists only want less Europe, or maybe none at all. But they don't get it either. So they're also always disappointed. And those two are framing the discussion about Europe. So for the one, it's too powerful. For the others, it's not powerful enough. But when you get to know Europe a little bit, you see that it is right in the middle. Moreover, and this dawned to me when I moved from Brussels to Vienna and started studying the Habsburg Empire, multinational entities, whether they're a state like the Habsburg Empire was, or the EU, which is not a state, you have to take all the wishes, the demands, the hang-ups, histories, the geography of all these nations and language groups and religious groups into account. If you don't do that, eventually they will leave. So all the decisions, the collective decisions, have to sort of reflect, not always in same equal measure, but still have to reflect the opinions of all the parts. This is what the Habsburgs did. It was an autocracy, of course. There was an emperor, and they even ate from golden or silver plates, depending on the occasion. They still have all these plates in the cellars of the Hofburg in Vienna. But still, if the emperor would not listen to the Czechs and the Slovenes and the people in Trieste and so on, eventually they would leave because they were surrounded by often angry rivals who were constantly trying to play one against the other and pulling them out. Well, there are some comparisons there. So you have to deal with compromises as a matter of definition. It's normal. So things can never be perfect. So that shows you why the federalists are wrong and the nationalists are wrong too, And I think we should look at the compromises that are made in Europe. Yes, we're always late. Yes, we're always bickering. It's always difficult to understand because every member state now wants to have an exception to the rule here, or a little bypass or a bridge there. It's very difficult to understand. It was exactly the same in the Habsburg Empire. And guess what? People were complaining all the time, like we are complaining, about things not being perfect, not being national enough, not being federal enough. But this is precisely the deal, I think. And I wish, that's what I learned, that we would not think about these matters in such a black and white way as we sometimes tend to do, but have more a regard for the gray tones, actually, because that's where we are, and it's good like that. It will never be better than that.
I love this title, it won't be, which is translated in Swedish. I read the Swedish version of your book with the title probably, it doesn't get better than this. And I think this is a good wake-up call, to move away from these utopian visions that often, they usually say that, perfection is the enemy of the good. And I think we have something good here. But this maybe brings me to the next questions that I wanted to ask you, Caroline, because we're now against the backdrop of a continent grappling with identity, unity, and purpose. So there's an interesting paradox that we're seeing at play, because on the one hand, the Eurobarometer results and also many other polling results show us that people are more pro-European or more in favor of Europe than ever before. I think that the interest in these European elections is higher than it's ever been in history. But at the same time, we're seeing a growing anti-European rhetoric or political groups that are maybe less pro-European emerging. How do we understand this paradox, and how do you think that we can see these things be happening at the same time? How would you explore these questions?
Well, I think they both sides of the equation, they reinforce one another. A lot of, in the run up to the elections now, a lot of people are saying, every newspaper every day is mentioning the rise of the far right. But there's something, then it's definitely scary. So those are the nationalists in the debate for whom there's always too much Europe. But there's something very interesting about the far right populists who have always been railing against Europe from a national podium. Now, and they wanted to go out, they wanted exits like Brexit. Now, with Putin, with Trump and Brexit, they don't want to go out anymore. They want to stay in. And guess what? They step on the European political podium. So for the first time, and they take their drama with them. They take their emotions with them. So, they're making, European politics less sterile, less about the shape of the bananas or fishing quota. So we have real issues now on the European agenda, and we have real politicians as well who take all their insults, the populist trick book with them, too much, of course, but at the same time, European political sphere, public sphere, comes alive because of that. So I think these things are in a way related. Many people are who until recently didn't care about Europe even. They never followed it. They didn't understand. They never took any trouble to start to understand. People were extremely passive. They were always complaining like it's so difficult and it's far away. But now they do an effort. I've been writing and talking more and more about Europe for 25 years. I get now 3-4 requests per day to come and speak about Europe. About the book, about the elections, that tells you something. There was this Eurobarometer showing that 72% of the Europeans actually think membership is a good thing, even if it's not perfect. 20 years ago, this was 50%. And the amount of people who said don't care was much larger than now. So something is happening. And I think in a ironic way, the arrival of the populists, it's not the only explanation, but it is part of that story. I think European politics is slowly becoming normal, reaching adulthood or something like that. Now, I hope that we answer them well enough, because they bring a lot of, in my view, undesirable views to Brussels. They don't want to leave Europe anymore. They want to change it from the inside in a way that is not to my liking most of the time. So I hope we are ambitious enough to really answer them well, because now it becomes really important.
Well, approaching the European elections makes Europe more relevant, of course, in the debate. It used to be less relevant, as you said. But going back to the comparison with the Habsburg Empire, which lasted quite a long time, and Europe is still young in this comparison. The long life of the Habsburg was also characterized by the idea of staying relevant, which was not always the case. Is Europe also in a struggle for staying relevant? And is that also a comparison that we should make?
Yeah, to a certain extent it is, because if the Habsburg Empire broke apart at the end of the First World War, not because of nationalism, but because of the war, and there was no money, all the political reforms were stopped, all the food went to the front because it was huge and the soldiers had to eat and fight. So slowly, the empire couldn't pay salaries anymore. It slowly stopped delivering for citizens, and that's when they turned to the nationalists who had always been there but never wanted to leave. And I think there is a parallel here. What you see now is that with the world changing very, very rapidly, and not to a way that is very desirable for Europeans or for Europe. Member states, even if they, from a national podium, they criticize everything that happens in Brussels, our prime ministers, heads of state and government. They do that, but at the same time, they come to Brussels all the time because they understand that, against big digital empires, against a brutish dictator like Putin with all his threats, in many, many, many ways, climate change is too big for one member state to solve on their own. So they all come to Brussels, sometimes half reluctantly, and ask Brussels to help them out, basically. And so I think we know Europe as a sort of a regulator, a factory of laws and regulations that we all love to hate, even though we ask for them all the time. Now it becomes more and more of a service provider too. The Commission is buying gas for everybody. The Commission is buying vaccines for everybody so that we all have them for a low price and we can start injecting, at the same day. It's delivering goodies because the member states ask for it. And I think, the Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, I'm not sure she draws a comparison with the Habsburg Empire, but I think she feels it, that if she does not deliver to the member states, they will find their own solution, maybe behind her back or something in a different way. So I think she feels very much what is at stake there.
As we wrap up our conversation today, and I think this is such an important conversation because, as you mentioned, it's really about changing our view of what Europe is. It's not about perfection. And I remember many years ago when we had this conversation, the view was very much that it's very easy to complain about your government or about bureaucracy, because bureaucracy is not particularly, there's always something that's going wrong. There's always something that's not working perfectly. And so, nobody has their favorite bureaucrat of the year kind of award for a reason. And Europe is known for being, the center, of bureaucracy. But this view that, as you're saying, as a service provider, as being able to be this kind of active area where all countries can come and find joint solutions in a very complicated, in a very global world to their own problems is a different approach to thinking about this. And I think there was I think the debate has recently changed in the past. People used to complain about governments because it was too much government. And I think today people are still complaining about governments, but because governments are not doing enough. And I think that's very much as well what you see with the European Union, that it's about Europe isn't doing enough on migration or on healthcare or on many different reasons, also many of which Europe doesn't have any mandate to work on. So it's interesting to see how the debate is shifting. But we always tend to want to end on a good note. Now we have these elections coming up, and I think there's a lot of doom and gloom discussions around it, that, it's the end of the world. What would you think is the aspiration and the positive view we should have in mind looking forward? And what can we hope that Europe would be able to achieve in the next mandate, so the next 5 years, to get closer to citizens and to really have this become this seen as a strong service provider in this global, quite complicated world?
Mm-hmm. I think we're sometimes, the Habsburgs were the same. Huh? I think we're too somber sometimes, too pessimistic, and this is one of these moments. And I think it is not right, because yes, there are challenges, but there are always challenges, and usually, knock on wood, but usually we overcome them. I read an interesting piece by a political scientist, Bridget Lafan, Irish political scientist who was working in Florence for many years at the European University Institute. And she said, we should look at Europe in a different way. We always think of, in terms of power, power over. So who's more important, my country or Europe? And if we ask Europe something, then Europe will be more powerful and we will be, as a country, less powerful. And she says we should radically think, start thinking in a different way. We should not look at power as power over, like who is dominating whom, but power to. So, which means the capacity to act. So there's a war going on in Ukraine. What can we do to help? Instead of, whose plan gets the upper hand? Is it Macron's plan? Is it Mr. Scholz's plan? It is putting things together and delivering. And I think that's a much more practical way of thinking about things, a little bit depoliticized. And I would say this is actually very much the European way of looking at heavy political things, when you run the risk of getting a bit bogged down into semantic discussions or maybe even ideological discussions. And I like that way of thinking because it frees you from, because at the moment, the member states are asking for a lot of Europe because there are many problems and they're not just European. Climate change is not a European problem, for instance. But the way we deal with it is on their request. It's more Europe, but in a way, because Europe manages to give them the goodies, gas or the vaccines, it is good for the member states as well. So they also get more powerful. Moreover, we get more Europe and the member states are very much involved in Brussels. When I started in working as a journalist here in Brussels, the government leaders, they met maybe twice or four times a year. and this was a very cozy fireside affair. Now sometimes it's twice a month. And they're visiting each other all the time, and not just talking about bilateral relations at all. So something is happening there, and I think the Commission is more powerful at the moment than before, but the member states are also more powerful. So they start discovering that you don't only give sovereignty to Europe, but you also get sovereignty back. For instance, in dealing with Facebook and Google, and making sure that they follow your rules, which they do. So I think there's no reason to be too pessimistic, and we should realize that people are always complaining that things are so bad in Europe, but we see more and more that elsewhere they're much worse. So we better get our act together and plow forward, and emphasize the things that we are good at. And the European way of life, I think, is something that we're doing fairly well. Something to be proud of.
Well, thank you very much, Caroline, for this, and to remind us that we should not always be so gloomy, and we should actually maybe look at what we are doing, which is which many other parts of the world are looking at in maybe not in admiration, but at least looking and seeing the good sides of Europe. And we should also maybe take that up and see how can we contribute to the global discussions that will be taking place in this century, because a lot will be decided. And I fully agree with you that standing together will definitely give us more power on a global stage to set the rules, whether it's global rules with companies that are bigger than many of the European nation states, as well as on climate change, on many of these fundamental existential questions. So thank you very much for delving into this with us. I think it's such an exciting and interesting analysis and comparison you did. I'd love to be able to speak to this. There's a whole areas that I would have loved to explore, but that's for next time. Thank you very much, Caroline.
Good. Thank you.